Good evening, Energy Rogue Nation. Welcome back to another weather discussion. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and happy Thursday to each and every one of you here joining us on the channel. I just wanted to give a quick programming note and let you know that tonight's video is not just going to be discussing European weather trends, but also the United States. There have just been a little bit of some developments that I want to touch on, and I know Tom, as well as other folks in Energy Rogue, have talked about, hey, Brendan, if there's any updates to the weather or anything that we need to be made aware of, feel free to let us know, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing tonight. There's a couple of things that I want to go over in more detail as it relates to our next major cold blast that is set to impact both the Northeast and the Midwest. More on that a little bit later on. But first, I would like to take a moment to introduce myself because we have had a few new subscribers to Energy Rogue here over the last couple of weeks. So I would be remiss not to give you a formal introduction because you have not seen me on the live streams in a while. But my name is Brendan. I am a degreed meteorologist. I have my bachelor's in meteorology from Northern Illinois University. And I have known Brian and Bill for well over a year. And the three of us have worked on a project together called WX Rogue, which you can check out here. We're going to go over this website also a little bit later on as part of the United States discussion. But Brian, Bill, and myself, we've been working on this project and we continue to build it out. And it is a weather product that is specific for the energy and nat gas industry. So it's a very niche, and weather already is niche in of itself, but this serves as a really good product to break down specifics as it relates to energy and even ag markets. So for example, we have here on the website population-weighted heating degree days, both from the GFS and the NAM. These are two different weather models that we pull from, and we are continuously building this out as well. So feel free to check it out, wxrogue.com. Again, it's wxrogue.com. This is completely free to not just subscribers, but pretty much anybody. But of course, that won't be the case for long. We will eventually put this behind a paywall, and it will pretty much be exclusive to the current subscriber base over at Energy Rogue. So if you're not subscribed yet and you're watching my main YouTube channel right now, head on over to energyrogue.com and get yourself signed up with a subscription. More information on that website. Okay, all pleasantries aside, wonderful to meet each and every one of you, for those of you folks that are new, and let's get right into it. So we're going to start first with Tropical Tidbits. This is a wonderful resource that is also free, and it's a website that I pull from quite a bit, especially when it comes down to the tropics and temperature changes. What we're going to start with first is the European model, and we're looking at the jet stream level. 500 millibars is a pressure reference frame for height. So when we talk in the weather world, 500 millibars or 250, we're really using height with pressure as that reference for height. In this case, why we're using this is because I want to really drive home the point for Europe and my European friends, the short-term trends that I've noticed and where I think we're going, at least in the immediate short term. For those of you here that are new, my forecast for Europe for this winter season is for a mostly above normal winter for both Western and Eastern Europe, and that goes from December all the way to February. However, in the immediate short term, and when we say short term, we're really talking about these next 2 weeks, I'm expecting to see a similar trend that we're going to be seeing in the United States, in that Western Europe and even parts of Eastern Europe could see continuous scattered cold blasts over that time frame. So like I said, we're going to start first here with the jet stream map. This takes us into Thursday, which is today, but also into Friday. Take a look at what's happening here. Okay, so we have this really dark red that's showing up on the map. This is actually corresponding to high pressure. Right, so here's our high pressure. Out in the Canadian provinces and New England, this would be low pressure. Now, what's important about this key feature is that high pressure helps to displace cold air from the poles southward. And that goes for anywhere downstream and even upstream of the high pressure. So for example, if we take this back a moment, you can see that by the time we get to early Friday morning, That high pressure sits right over the northern Atlantic, but meanwhile, places like Spain and Portugal are going to see some cold air be displaced south. And then folks in New England and back towards those eastern Canadian provinces will also see cold air. So when we're talking about downstream and upstream, we're referring to the reference point of high pressure, and then your upstream is to the left of the high pressure, and downstream is to the east or to the right. And that's important because what that's going to help to do is drive this cold air eventually eastward into Western Europe. By the time we get to later on this weekend into possibly even early next week, and it looks as though, early next week, right around even that Tuesday, Wednesday time frame for Western Europe could certainly be something to watch. And that's not going to be the only time that we see it. We could even see potentially another system make its way through Western Europe by the time we get to that Saturday, Sunday time frame. That is still to be determined, but the point is, at least in the immediate term, I am anticipating that we see some of these below normal temperatures like we've seen the last couple days throughout Western Europe to actually return. And it's funny because I think a lot of the discussion has been about the United States, respectfully so. A lot of nat gas traders and energy traders are really focused in on those demand areas, especially the Northeast, the South Central United States, and the Midwest. But while we've been talking about that, there's been another story that's been happening the last couple days, and that is Western Europe has seen below to even well below normal temperatures during that same span. So this video could not come at a better time, folks, especially for my European friends. We have neglected the conversation, which I'm sure you can forgive us because the United States certainly has been sort of taking the storylines, especially as we head into what will be another cold blast. Again, more on that a little bit later on. So if we head on over to Europe in of itself, so we head on over to the Europe region. If I actually can locate this on the fly, you think I could by now. I use this website far too often. And there it is. I missed it. I glossed over it twice. But let's take a look at some of these temperature anomalies here. And the important distinction is that we are talking about climatological normals between 1981 and 2010. So when we look at this, we're not necessarily saying it's hot. These red temperatures are simply just saying that it is X amount of degrees Celsius above normal for that specific region. So if we take this back, and actually I should say, let's take it back here to right about Thursday, which would be today. And we look, the last few days, again, below normal temperatures, especially for France, Germany, the United Kingdom, much of England, and even back towards Spain. And much of Russia has actually been slightly above normal during that same span. But as we see that system we talked about move into the region, we will see that initial warm air move through. But look at this. We see that cold air begin to seep in by the time we get to the middle of next week. So again, we see that initial cold that we've been seeing. It's then preceded by some of those above normal temperatures, especially for England, but then we really begin to kind of see a little bit of a drop off there, right? So that's something to keep an eye on. The anomalies may not be really underscoring that because, again, you might be looking at this saying, Brennan, it looks above normal. Doesn't look like it's going to be cold. Well, in terms of the departure from above normal, that's really what I'm talking about. And as you can see, again, if we head into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, look at the areas, especially we're talking about Spain, Portugal, even back towards France, Germany, seeing some of those, again, below normal temperatures. But I will say, at times, we will still see above normals, especially for England. And that still remains my seasonal forecast. Despite this little blip of cold air that continues to kind of meander its way into Western Europe, I still think that once this is all said and done, we will be seeing a tale of two winters, with Europe being mostly above normal throughout the season, and really can't say the same about the United States. So for those folks that are, again, really adamant and follow European trading closely, especially on the nat gas energy side, and you have questions as it relates to weather for that particular region, be sure to post those questions in the Weather Rogue Discord channel in the Energy Rogue Discord server. Talk about a mouthful, right? But please don't ever hesitate to ask those questions. I'm happy to have those conversations because, again, the United States really has been the main headlines for a lot of us over the last what seems to be several days. Speaking of which, let's now head on over to the United States and let's take a look at that. And let's use the same map that we used before. So we'll go back and look at the 500 millibar jet. We'll look at upper dynamics and we'll click 500, height anomaly, there we go. And so this map, once again, is rather critical. And this actually goes back a few hours as well. So this takes us into Wednesday, which would have been yesterday. And this is that low pressure system that has brought down a ton of that cold towards the central United States, even parts of the south central seeing some of this colder air, and eventually making its way into the northeast this afternoon. And as we talked about at the top of the video, a lot of that is attributed to high pressure out in the northern Atlantic that helps to displace cold air upstream and displace cold air downstream. We're seeing that in real time even today. And this won't be the last time that we see it, because as we head into what would be next week, we see another area of high pressure setting up, almost in the same spot. We see another upper level ridge that pretty much positions itself just off the coast of New England, and then here comes that cold air being displaced upstream, and once again impacting the central United States and eventually the Northeast, potentially even the South Central United States. So one of the things that I want to just lead a caveat to is the GFS does tend to have a cold bias, meaning that it may be outputting temperatures that are going to be much colder than what ends up being observed. That's not always the case, because as we saw this past week, the GFS was actually underdoing what was the observed. But if we're just taking the biases of these models, one of the more notable ones of the GFS is that it does tend to output colder temperatures than what is observed. All right, so that's kind of the big distinction there. So as we continue to go forward in time, right, this takes us into what would be pretty much this time next week, and then eventually into what would be next weekend. That is a major cold blast that could be impacting the Northeast and New England. We'll take a look at another model here in a moment, as well as the ensembles, but the point is we could really be talking about, once again, another cold blast impacting the Northeast, New England, and the Midwest. And surely that has major implications on the trading side as well. But just from the weather point of view, it goes without saying, I don't think we're done with this. I really don't. This, as a matter of fact, this whole pattern that we see with this high pressure setting up in the northern Atlantic, cold air getting displaced south like this is very much reminiscent of climatological La Nina, which we're in right now. La Nina would tell us that we would see cold air impacting this sliver of the country, while the rest of the nation, mostly the South especially, sees those above normal temperatures for most of the season. So this, and why I keep really sounding alarm bells here, ladies and gentlemen, is not just the model confidence, it's not just the observed, but it's also the climatology. It's what La Nina analogs tell us, and everything is pretty much falling into place with what we would expect in a traditional season. Very much different than what we saw in the last La Ninas that were 2020, 21, and 2022. Let's now take a look at the European model perspective on this. And, again, we are still looking at the 500 millibar jet, so we're not looking at temperature here or anomalies. We're looking at the jet stream. And so as you see here, there's a very similar confidence in terms of cold air advection making its way down into the northern United States. The only difference is that the European model is not showing much amplification with this high pressure, which means that it's not going to be forcing cold air farther south than, say, the Midwest and the Northeast. So this is not a surprise to me. You have two different models. You have the European model here, and you have the GFS, right? You have these two models, and they are very much different in terms of timing right now, as well as amplification of cold air. But where they both agree this far out is that we will see cold air advection once again taking shape. And that, to me, is also the reason why I continue to echo this messaging of we are not done. This is not a fake out of winter. This is not the 2 weeks of winter we saw last season. This is a totally different season than what we saw last year. And that's certainly playing out on all faucets that I just mentioned. Finally, we'll look here at the ensembles, and we'll just pull the GEFS here, and let's actually get a little bit closer to the United States so that way we can pull some of these temperature anomalies. And so take a look at this, right? So we see this cold air making its way across the Midwest as of today, as well as even into Friday, well below normal temperatures across the Midwest, the Northeast, even parts of the South seeing some of these below normal temperatures too. Meanwhile, the South Central United States still remains above normal during this period. And we should see that by the time we get to this weekend, a bit of a reprieve from the cold air, even some very above normal temperatures across the same regions of the Midwest. Northeast will be experiencing that cold lagging in by this weekend, but a very warm temperature regime, quick recovery across much of the central United States. But then watch what happens as that moves through. And by the way, for context, this warm air advection regime typically implies really strong low pressure with a strong warm front and a strong cold front. And what that tells me is anytime you see really, really elevated above normal temperatures is typically superseded by cold air that follows behind it of somewhat equal magnitude. So as we go forward in time, again, huge warm up, but then here comes that cold that follows right behind it. And this would take us again into the middle to late next week. So be very mindful of that. We're going to see some very mild temperatures, very unseasonable temperatures as we head into the weekend and early next week. But I cannot stress that enough. Do not let that fool you, because winter is still here and it's going to follow likely right behind that system. Of course, the question becomes how strong cold air magnitude are we talking about? How far south are we going to see it? That's still a big question mark today. But you really need to keep this in your sort of purview here, because all the models continue, especially our medium range ones, continue to show low pressure, a strong system really taking shape across the eastern United States, the central United States, and bringing with it possibly even some showers and thunderstorms across the Gulf. And with that, if we do see a strong barometric system like this, that also would imply and then correlate to a strong cold air regime that follows right behind it. So that is the GEFS, and I guess just for the sake of time, we'll take a look here at the EPS, and we can see as we head into, again, Wednesday, Thursday, a little bit of some question marks here, and timing is key, but this is the same cold air regime we're talking about that follows right behind that cold front and that low pressure system that's going to bring warm air beginning of next week, likely for much of the United States. The difference with the European ensemble is that the timing is different, and also the degree of cold is different. It shows a little bit less of a magnitude, but even more so, just lesser magnitude and less impacts across much of the United States. You do see some below normal temperatures once again getting into the Gulf, but certainly not to the degree that the GFS is wanting to have happen for even places like Texas. So we will keep you posted on this and watch this very closely. If models even uptrend on this, we could be talking about the coldest air we have seen this season yet. Could even be talking about some of our first negative single-digit wind chills for many folks in the United States. Again, especially the central and eastern United States could be seeing some negative wind chills and possibly even some single-digit temperatures if this were to come true. So last thing that I want to show tonight is just turn you right back to WX Rogue and bring it full circle. And let's take a look at that same chart I showed at the beginning, which is the population-weighted heating degree days by EIA region. So I want to provide context too. For those of you folks that have accessed this website, which is many of you by now, this is updated twice a day. All right, so this is updated twice a day. Model runs do come out 4 times a day, and it is something that I'm actively thinking about implementing, is rather than doing 2 updates, just pretty much do 4, which would pretty much coincide with what the models output on a day-to-day basis. But for now, we're just doing 2. But the latest run for tonight shows an even higher magnitude of population-weighted heating degree days for our total degree days. So certainly seeing a huge ramp up in our HDD by the time we get to the winter solstice which would be around that 20th to the 21st. But there's one thing I want to note with this. Actually, two things to think about in the back of your mind. Number one, for context, this is the GFS. And we've established many times over that the GFS has a cold bias. So we got to take that into account. We also have to take into account uncertainty. We are still far out, right? So you guys know that by now. That's the meteorology cop-out is, it's still too far. But then the third one is that these values could actually still go higher. And you're probably thinking, well, Brennan, doesn't that kind of contradict what you just said? You just said that the GFS is uncertain and that it has a cold bias, so why are you saying that it could get colder? Well, because we just saw that last run. So this cold ramp up that we've seen take place both today and as well as extending into tomorrow, this has actually observed or verified higher than what models were outputting in the days leading up to it. So I would say for these charts, these are really good indications of the trend. You can even see it here. You see that massive drop down or drop off in HDD as we get to early next week, which will be accompanied by that warm up with that low pressure system we talked about, really strong warm front. So therefore we would see and expect to see a pretty strong drop off in HDD. But then behind that, right, there's that cold air following suit. So you can really see this play out on these charts in real time, which is fantastic. But we see this just oscillating wave. And so this kind of pattern that you see on a chart like this really denotes what I expect to see this winter, especially really over the next several weeks, of just this constant ebb and flow. And it really hasn't gone away since the fall, but the only difference is now we're seeing some really strong cold air packing a punch behind it, as opposed to more of a milder temperature regime that we saw back in September. So I continue to say it, we are not done with winter. So long as we have these rapid warm-ups, we're going to then see that rapid cool down, and that's because of everything that we're seeing out west in the Pacific, which we didn't talk about tonight, but think, in the Western Pacific, you got high pressure out there too, and then you got high pressure out in the Atlantic. Well, all that jet stream is going to ride over top of those high pressures. It's going to create a ridge, a trough, and a ridge. And anywhere where that trough is, that is cold air. And that trough is going to mostly position itself across the Midwest and the Northeast periodically over these next several weeks. Listen, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, be sure to post those in the Weather Rogue Discord or leave a comment down below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel as well, and I hope each and every one of you have a great rest of your night, and we will see you on the next weather video. Take care.